Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over my first ever prediction for the 2024 United States Senate elections, which are a little under 2 years away. I know it seems like a long time, but in politics, and in politics especially, 2 years is an eternity. But it's important to start documenting it since we are over the 2022 midterms now. We have the results from pretty much every race, for Congress and the governorships, and also, of course, the attorney general races. I think the in Arizona's attorney general's race, the Democrat just got called the winner. But that's besides the point. Before we get into it, wanted to wish you guys a Merry Christmas or a happy holiday, I guess, to be a little bit more inclusive here. But I just hope that you're spending times with your friends and family and you know, enjoying this holiday season. 2023 will be an exceptionally interesting year, and we'll have more data then. We'll have more, ability to make more. We'll have a better, more concrete understanding of these Senate races as the months go on. But since we are 2 years away, I want to make it clear that I will not be doing these every 2 weeks. I will not be updating my predictions every 2 weeks simply because we are not close enough to that point where that's going to be where I think that that's justified. I think once we reach around May of 2024, around the same time that I made my first ever prediction for 2022, um, you know, for that year, obviously. Um, then we will start to make these, every other week, So, hold on, be patient because these will be coming out every month. I will have some stuff going on in my personal life, but obviously I will be paying attention to these Senate races. We'll have more announcements coming in to see which senators will be retiring. I'll make a video on that fairly soon. But let's just get right into it. So to refresh your memory, because I know that political YouTube has kind of been dead for the last couple of weeks after the midterms. The Democrats have won 51 Senate seats this time around. They gained a seat from by winning the state of Pennsylvania as well as holding on to all of their competitive seats. It was pretty much it was a pretty good night for the Democrats overall. They did lose the states of Wisconsin, Ohio, and North Carolina, which were the other three pretty competitive races here, but those were not necessarily surprising, and in fact, they did pretty well in all three of them. So, that being said, it was a pretty good night for the Democrats. They were able to expand their seat, their Senate majority. Obviously, Kirsten Sinema from Arizona is going to make that a little bit more difficult since she is now registered as an independent and has left the Democrats. So she will no longer be affiliated with them. And speaking of which, we can hop over here to this little filled-in Senate map that I made here on yapamems.com. You can go to this website and find it. If you go in here, you can look at USA. Then you scroll down, you'll see current Senate. That's how I got here. There are other maps too. But essentially, you can fill in the Senate any way you wish. So I just made it based on what the new Congress is going to look like. Some states have a blue senator, a red dot here, a blue dot there, based on seniority. I won't get into it, but basically, you can see that 49 Republicans are in the Senate, 48 Democrats, and 3 independents, including Kirsten Sinema, Bernie Sanders, and Angus King. These two are going to caucus with the Democrats. Kirsten Sinema is not a very clear picture. I've heard a lot of people say she is caucusing or she isn't caucusing. It's not, a clear picture now of where it stands, but and we can actually look on here actually and see it. It does say she's that she is caucusing with them, but as I've said, there are, she is still not a member of the official party, um, or an official member of the party, and also. I've seen other sources that suggest otherwise, but right now we're just going to assume that she does caucus with the Democrats because, at the end of the day, even though a lot of Democrats, including myself, aren't big fans of her, she still votes with President Biden the overwhelming majority of the time, just not to the same extent that some others do. So anyways, if you add up these three independents and give them all to them to the Democrats, you'll get them to that 51st number. But if you look at 2024 Senate map, it is a lot more daunting for the Democrats. They're going to have to defend 23 seats, including these three independents, And it will have at least 8 competitive races to watch out for. I think that I did that right. You got Arizona, Nevada, Montana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. I think that's 8. But you can also reach beyond here and see if there are any potential retirements. Maybe Virginia, Tim Kaine retires, and there's a potential for that race to be competitive. Or New Mexico, Martin Heinrich retires, even though it's pretty clear he's going to run, and I don't expect Tim Kaine to retire either. But in a best case scenario for the GOP, if these are open seats, and 2024 is a red wave, these seats could be put into jeopardy for the Democrats. In same case if Amy Klobuchar retires. Now none of these are very likely, and in fact, I expect Democrats to do pretty well in a lot of states in 2024. But as you can see, they have states such as Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia to deal with. And in a presidential year, that's going to be exceedingly difficult because even though they've got good incumbents here, there's going to be a down ballot effect from the Republican nominee for president, whether that be Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Glenn Youngkin, you name it. That's going to help the Republican challengers here. I do expect all three of them to run. If they don't run, these are automatic flips, pretty much for the GOP. But the Democratic incumbents do make these races highly competitive. Although I would say that they should still be concerned, considering the way that their states have voted on at the top of the ticket, and the fact that presidential years is where you see the least down ballot, or where you see the most down ballot voting. So with that, let's get into the safe. Let's go on to this map right here. This is another map from yapamems.com. You got the USA Senate class. This is Senate Class 1, which is the first of the free classes. 2024. This is the same map the Democrats were facing in 2018. Of course, there was a special election in Mississippi, and this isn't an exact representation of the 2024 map, but I figured, I put off this prediction until we would get that Senate map, but it does seem to be kind of lingering for a little bit. So, and I wanted to get out my prediction for the month of December 2022. So, with all that rambling, I don't even know how many minutes we're into the video. Let's get started with my actual predictions. So we're going to start by filling in the safe blue and red states. These are the states that are going to go to the Democrats or Republicans by over 15 percentage points, as you can see here. A pretty standard map. I will point out a couple of these states. You may be surprised to see the Minnesota is in the safe blue column, although I will explain that. You got your typical Republican states here: Utah, Wyoming, Nebraska. There will be 2 special elections. I'll talk about the special election in a second. North Dakota, Missouri, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Indiana. So as you can see here, Republicans have 8 solid seats. Democrats have 12. Of course, this is only 30. This is only a third of the Senate map. So we don't have an exact number of how many seats, but I think 49 minus 10 would be 39. So Republicans would be at 47 seats, and then Democrats would be at, well, what's 51 minus 23? I think that'd be 28. So they'd be at 40 seats. So the Republicans have a 7-seat advantage over the Democrats right now in terms of their overall numbers. Now we're going to get into, or sorry, I got to point out the few safe states that may surprise you. So Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar is pretty, has made it clear that she intends to run for re-election. She is an absolute juggernaut. She, wins by 25, 30 points almost every time. And while I think that it may be a little bit closer due to polarization catching up to her, I still do expect her to do very well for a Democrat in Minnesota, which is already historically a very blue state. Although, it is definitely not, a safe blue state in many regards, but I would say that Klobuchar is probably going to win by over 15%. Although if Republicans, nominate someone who's decent here, maybe it does fall below that 15-point threshold, but I really don't see, much opportunity for the Minnesota GOP, at least not in this race. When we go over to Maine, Angus King is one of those independents I was mentioning earlier. It looks like he's going to run despite, him hinting at potentially retiring. He's going to be, I think, 80 years old. Yeah, 80 years old in 2024. So he'll be up there in age, but again, so many other senators on both sides of the aisle are. And he is very, very popular. He wins by very large margins most of the time, even when there are Democratic challengers on on his left flank. So whoever the Republicans run against him there, it doesn't really matter. Maine is also a state that really likes their independence, both figuratively and literally. So yeah, I think Angus King will be fine. And even if he doesn't run, it's probably still a pretty safe bet for Democrats, although it probably dropped to likely. For the Republicans, they're going to have two seats to defend in Nebraska because one of the senators, Ben Sass, who voted to impeach Donald Trump, is actually retiring or resigning, should I say, to become president of the University of Florida next month. So he will be resigning to fill, the new governor of the state, or the incoming governor, Jim Pillen, will have to appoint a replacement for him. And so there are a lot of people that have been rumored. There has been, there's been Don Bacon from the second congressional district, who has been rumored. There has been Mike Flood, the congressman from the first district, who had that pretty close special election back in the summer. But you see the main three here, and one candidate pretty much pops out and overshadows the others, and that is Governor Pete Ricketts, who is term limited. He is leaving office in just a couple of weeks, and he actually endorsed Pillen in the GOP primary to succeed him, even though Trump had endorsed a different opponent. And so my thinking was that even though Sass had not publicly announced that he was running, I do, think that there may have been some talk about it, and I think that he may have discussed it with Ricketts, and so Pillen kind of thought, well, if I endorse this guy, maybe and I let him, have the reins over this appointment, maybe he can appoint me to become the next senator. And I do think that's what's going to happen. I really do think that Pete Ricketts is going to succeed Ben Sass. Is there a chance that he doesn't? Of course. But I think it's pretty clear that he wants it. And obviously, he has already declared he was the nominee against Ben Nelson in 2006. It didn't go so well for him then, but again, politics and polarization are are much different now. So Nebraska, just imagine a little circle here. We'll get an official Senate map eventually, but just imagine that there is a little circle here next to, so to signify that there is two Republicans up. Indiana, also Mike Braun, the incumbent Republican there, will be retiring to run for governor of Indiana. Not something that I would have said if you had asked me who's the most likely, or who are the most likely GOP senators to retire just a couple of months ago. I would not have had Braun on that list, but it does look like he's going to retire, even though he is a one termer, and he's going to seek the governorship of Indiana. And so there are a lot of people that have been rumored. In fact, the Republican governor himself, Eric Holcomb, has expressed some interest for this seat. So it'd be kind of funny to watch him and Braun trade jobs. I think that Victoria Spartz from the fifth district could be, very, very I think that she could be, a candidate who could win the primary. This is going to be a pretty contested primary, but overall, I don't expect the general election to be too competitive. It's Indiana, it's more Democratic down ballot, and if Democrats nominate, I thought that Pete Buttigieg might run for this seat, although I don't think he would have been too competitive. But I think he and his family have moved to Michigan now, so that's out. Evan Bayh might run, but even he lost to Todd Young in 2016, so I really don't see opportunity for Democrats here. It's a really big reach for them. The only two seats where they really have a chance at are Texas and Florida. And that actually brings us into a good point, or a good transition point for the likely states. So these are the states that are going to fall below, that where the margin falls between 5 and 15%. So these are not necessarily the most competitive states, and likely is a big range. So some of them will be a lot closer to being hyper competitive races like lean and tilt. Others will be pretty close to safe. But we're going to go over them. We'll start by filling in the likely Democratic states again. Just for reference, likely isn't necessarily the most competitive, but it's also not, characterization. The states in this column are not necessarily completely out of reach for either party, but they are still pretty unlikely, hence the name, haha. So we're going to start by filling out the likely Democratic states. I'm going to try to go through them pretty quickly. We'll start with New Mexico and Virginia, which I already briefly talked about. Martin Heinrich in New Mexico is a pretty good candidate. He did only get 54% of the vote in 2018, but that was mainly due to the fact that there was a Republican and Libertarian, Gary Johnson, who ran for president in 2016 on the ballot. And I know Libertarians are more conservative, and they probably took away more votes from the GOP than Heinrich. But still, there are a lot of people in New Mexico who like Gary Johnson, obviously because he ran for president. He's pretty well known across the country. He was the former governor of the state. So I do expect Heinrich to have a pretty solid victory here. Mark Ronchetti could make the race interesting if he decides to run, but I don't really think that he's going to. He got a little overhyped for that governor's race in 2022, although he did do fairly well against Lujan Grisham. But either way, I don't, think that New Mexico is too attainable for the Republicans, and I think that they are probably going to lose all three House seats. I heard that Yvette Harrell is going to try to run for the second congressional district against Gabe Vasquez. I don't know how well that's going to do, but we'll have to wait and see. Virginia, there's been a lot of hype about this race being competitive if Governor Glenn Youngkin jumps into the race. And I'm going to tell you right here that I think that he's getting a little overhyped. Yes, Youngkin won in 2021 in a governor's race that looked like it was going to be pretty solid for Terry McAuliffe. But remember that McAuliffe wasn't the greatest candidate. He kind of shot himself in the foot with saying that he doesn't think he didn't think parents should tell schools what they should teach, which really kind of angered a lot of suburban voters, especially in the Nova area, who are, and in Loudoun County, who are, pretty concerned about their parents' educate or their kids' education. And Youngkin was really able to turn this race into a localized one. He was able to kind of keep Trump at arm's length here, and I do think he would put up an okay challenge to Tim Kaine, but he's still going up against a pretty popular senator, a pretty non-controversial one. And I think, and Kane, to be in all fairness, was the governor of Virginia too. So I think Democrats, you know, I think Youngkin's really good in an off year for the GOP, but I think on a more national level, he wouldn't do quite as well. I don't think, I think he is someone that could run for Senate and, maybe in 2026. And if that's a red wave, maybe he makes it a lot more competitive. Or, he could run for president maybe down or further down the road. But right now, I don't really think that he is going to have too much of a shot at winning this race. Maybe it moves down to Lean. I've heard some people suggest that. But overall, I do think that Youngkin's getting a little overhyped for Virginia. New Jersey, well, I guess we can do Pennsylvania and New Jersey. New Jersey, Bob Menendez, the incumbent Democrat, is pretty scandal plagued. He is definitely not the best candidate. And, Republicans do tend, Republicans have had a couple of, a couple of surges in New Jersey over the past couple of years. Of course, they did pretty well in, again, the Republican nominee for Senate, I forget his name, in 2018 did pretty well against Menendez, only lost by 11, even though that was a blue wave. Um, in Republicans, pretty much, Jack Ciattarelli did really, really well in the governor's race in 2021, but I think that was mainly due to lower turnout. I think that's what hurt. That was a big part of why Virginia flipped, and New Jersey was so close. Not to say that swing voters didn't matter at all, but I think Democrats were definitely not super enthused to vote with the national environment and with Biden's very, very low approval ratings at that time. And Menendez, as I've said, is pretty scandal plagued, and I do think if he does get a good challenger, like say the incoming representative from the seventh district, Tom Keene Jr., that could potentially make this race competitive. Maybe even have a bit of a revamped New York 2022 effect, where Keene boosts Republicans down ballot. I don't think it'd be to the same extent as Lee Zeldin, but I do think that he could help Republicans down ballot. I think Jack Ciattarelli probably won't run for this seat, and I do think he would probably get a little overhyped too, like Glenn Youngkin. But at the same time, it's not entirely out of the question. Although since he has said he's going to run for governor next time in 2025, I doubt that he goes back and decides to run for Senate unless he's just trying to um get another election out of the way, I guess, in his career. Pennsylvania, this is a very competitive state usually, but Bob Casey Jr. is an electoral giant. He has won by very large margins in the past. He ousted Then Republican incumbent Rick Santorum in 2006 by a whopping 17 percentage points. He is a juggernaut. He outperforms almost every single time. He pretty much outperforms every Democrat at the top of the ticket. I do think Republicans will probably try to pick someone who's more moderate here, like Dave McCormick, who I do think could make the race single digits, potentially even a lean margin. This will probably be Casey's closest race yet with polarization, but I still do expect him to have a fairly solid victory here. The final likely blue state is Michigan, where Debbie Stabenow does seem to be in the position to run for re-election. Although if she goes back on her promise, on her statement a couple months ago, this probably does drop to lean. But I do think she's going to have a fairly solid re-election here. Again, polarization hurts her here, but and if Republicans find a good candidate like James Craig, or they coax John James into running again, even though I don't think he's that great, maybe it drops to lean. But Republicans are coming off an awful cycle in 2022. They're in a lot of disarray. Michigan, I think, has kind of proven itself to still have a lot of ancestral and is still ancestrally a very democratic state. As the results showed, Democrats did really well in the state legislative races. I think they flipped both chambers for the first time since in nearly I think a few decades. It was they had a pretty historic win in Michigan. Whitmer won by 10 points, out more than she did in 2018. So right now, I think Michigan's still a state that could be really competitive, but right now I'd say Debbie Stabenow wins by around 5 or 6 points. So not the most attainable for the GOP. She's a decent incumbent, and I don't really see her losing, at least not right now. Now we're going to get into the two likely red states, which are Texas and Florida. These are pretty much the only two Republican-held states on the map that have a you know, semi-realistic chance of going Democratic. And, I only say semi-realistic because of Florida. I think Texas could potentially get a little bit closer if Ted Cruz does kind of shoot himself in the foot and, his unpopularity rises, or his popularity, I guess, declines. But, Texas is still more Republican down ballot. 2022's governor race showed that. I do think if Beto O'Rourke does run for this race, it could become more competitive. But, even though the Texas suburbs are shifting pretty far to the left, the Rio Grande Valley is going to, keep Texas red at least for a couple more cycles. But people saying that Texas isn't going to flip blue, is just going to stay red forever, are pretty much ignoring the fact that the Rio Grande Valley has much less of the population than the suburban areas. So I think Cruz, he probably won't face O'Rourke. Quite frankly, it doesn't really seem like there's going to be that he's going to run. He isn't even mentioned in the potential candidates list. So, I do kind of think that O'Rourke, he's going to have to wait for the trends to kind of continue. But, I do think he has a future. I think Cruz would win probably by like 7 or 8%, maybe 6. It could drop to lean if things get, a little dicey for the GOP here. And I do think that Texas will be pretty close on the presidential level, or if it's Trump versus Biden. So now we've got six leaner tilt races. These are pretty much the truly competitive races here. I'm going to try to go through them fairly quickly because I've been making this video for quite a long time. This video's been going on for a long time. So we're going to start off with the lean states, which will be decided between 1 and 5%. They're not the most, they're not the closest states, but they are still hyper competitive and could, conceivably, and could do have a much better shot than the likely states at flipping either way. We'll start off with the lean Republican states, the first of which is going to be West Virginia. The incumbent here is Democrat Joe Manchin. I don't think I really need to explain him to you. Pragmatic Democrat, pretty blue dog, pretty, pretty much a thorn in Biden's side, or his agenda's side. So, overall, a pretty good fit for a state as conservative as West Virginia. But again, the down ballot effects are going to hurt Democrats here. And I do think that, Manchin is probably going to lose. I think he has a better chance than a lot of Republicans think. I think a lot of them think that, like, Jim Justice or Alex Mooney would just crush Manchin by, over 10 points in this race. And obviously a lot of them use 10-point margins as the safe threshold. Obviously I use 15, as I said earlier. But I do think Manchin would probably lose by 4 or 5% if the election were held today. I do expect Alex Mooney, to probably be the nominee. He's the one who's announced he's running in the primary. I think Jim Justice has a very good chance at running as well. He'd probably beat him by a likely margin, but either way, I do think Manchin will, substantially outperform whoever the Democratic nominee is. But again, West Virginia is the state that voted for Donald Trump by 40 points, by 40 points in 2016, a little less in 2020. So very, very red state. Manchin's got a conceivable shot, but I do think that the down ballot effect is going to curse him, and it's going to flip this seat to whoever the GOP nominee is. The other lean state will be the state of Montana, where John Tester is running, or actually, we don't know if he's running for re-election, just like Manchin. But I do get the sense that he's going to run, although he has considered retirement, which would make this pretty much a lock for the GOP to flip. Tester's a good incumbent. He's won in presidential years before. Exhibit A, I guess, would be 2012 when he defeated forget the guy's name, but he defeated his Republican opponent, even though Barack Obama lost the state to Mitt Romney by 14 points. But again, polarization is catching up to a lot of these candidates, and same as West Virginia, I think it's going to be a little too much for Tester to overcome. He'd probably lose by around 3 or 4. I go back between whether West Virginia or Montana is more solid. Is the big has a better chance of going Republican, but I would say West Virginia I would put a little bit higher than Montana. Tester, though, I do think if he gets a bad opponent like Representative Ryan Zinke, who, didn't have too great of a performance in Montana's first district this year, he probably becomes a toss-up, probably tilting Democratic. But I do think someone like Matt Rosendale, is more likely to be the GOP nominee. I know he lost in 2018, but at the same time, he's less controversial. He had a pretty good performance this year in his House election. And, keep in mind that, 2018 was a midterm year, and that you know, I think that, it being a referendum against Trump made it more, friendly to a more tester friendly environment. But I do think this year Tester will lose. Now we'll go into the two lean Democratic states. We'll go over Nevada first. Jackie Rosen is, running for reelection. She's made it pretty clear. The Republican primary is, there are a lot of potential candidates who could run here. There's been talk about Rick Harrison, who's a businessman from Nevada running. I don't think he would do too well. Adam Laxalt may run again. I think he got a little overhyped this year, but partly because of how bad the bench was for the national bench was for Senate Republicans, all across the country. And he does, there were signs, from his loss in the governor's race and his only narrow victory in 2014 in his attorney general's race that, he may indeed lose. I think Joe Lombardo could be a really good candidate, but he's probably going to focus on his job as governor of Nevada. Mark Ahmadi from the 2nd Congressional District had a really good performance this year. I think he would be a solid recruit for the GOP, but probably the best would be Brian Sandoval, the former governor of Nevada, who won by a whopping 46 points in 2014. I know that 2014 was a red wave across the country, very good for Republicans, a very good year for Nevada Republicans. But Sandoval is someone who has been the former attorney general of the state. I believe he was. Yeah, he's the. I think he was the attorney general of Nevada. Let me double check that here. Yeah, he was the attorney general. He was the chair of the National Governors Association. He's had a lot of roles. He's very popular. I think that he would be able to defeat Jackie Rosen. But he is, he's been out of politics for a couple of years, and so I do think that he probably won't run, but there is a good chance that he decides to. Sam Brown, who lost to Laxalt in the primary, could run. I think he would get destroyed too. Rosen, isn't as good with Hispanic voters in Clark County as Cortez Masto, but I think that she's overall a little bit more, palatable for a lot of suburban voters. I think she would do better in Washoe than Cortez Masto just because of how left trending it is. She'd probably do, about the same, maybe a little bit worse in Clark. So I think that she would have about a 2 or 3 point victory. It could go Republican if the GOP finds a good candidate, but right now I don't think that they are favored here. Then we got Wisconsin with Tammy Baldwin deciding to run for re-election. She won by a very large margin in 2018, about 11 percentage points, doing a lot better than Governor Tony Evers at that time. Or now Governor Tony Evers. He then, he wasn't governor at that time. But Baldwin did have a really bad opponent in 2018, and I do expect with polarization this race to be a lot more competitive and to be decided by a much smaller margin. But I do think that as of right now, I would call her the favorite. Evers won in 2018, won re-election in 2022, pretty much shocked everyone, including myself. Ron Johnson only won by a point in Wisconsin, so Wisconsin Democratic Party has really been getting lucky, or not lucky, but has really been doing really well in the last couple of years. And so I do think that, Baldwin would probably outperform Joe Biden or whoever the Democrats run. I think it's going to be Biden. She would probably outperform the Democratic nominee for president by a couple of points. Although this race could be more competitive if the GOP finds a good challenger, I think that it could be Brian Steele from the first district, Tom Tiffany, and I think the best candidate would really be Mike Gallagher from the eighth congressional district, who actually won an ancestrally Democratic county in his House. When he was reelected this year in the House. I think it's Menominee County, which is like a D+60 county, but keep in mind that there was no Democrat running, and there was a lot of he had a lot of opponents, like an independent and a libertarian. So he obviously did get some vote splitting that benefited him there. So I do think that Gallagher would be a solid recruit for this race. He can make it a toss-up, potentially even beat Baldwin. But right now I do think that she is a strong enough incumbent to hold on. She has been carving out a lot of bipartisan deals. She was really helpful in getting the Respect for Marriage Act passed. She helped persuade a lot of Republicans to vote for it. So I do think that Wisconsin's going to reflect on that and say, we appreciate that, since it's a pretty socially liberal state, but it is trending right, of course, which does make her endangered. So now we've got the two toss-up states, and these are going to be decided by less than 1 percentage points. These are the true toss-up states, Arizona and Ohio, both of which are held by, well, Ohio's held by a Democrat, and Arizona's held by Kirsten Sinema, an independent. I'm going to give both of these to the Republicans. They're probably going to win them by tilt margins, at least by excuse me, by my estimations. Sherrod Brown in Ohio is a really good candidate, and I think that he's a really good shot at victory here. But again, down ballot effect is going to help the Republican nominee here, whether it be Frank LaRose, Matt Dolan, whoever, Steve Chabot. I don't think he would run, but just throwing out some Ohio GOP names that I'm familiar with. And so, that gives Brown a really good chance. He's very good with working class voters. He's the only Democrat who's won in Ohio. Besides Obama in the last decade. And he's got a really good chance, but I do think that Ohio is right trending enough where it's probably going to vote against him, unless he draws like a Josh Mandela challenger, which doesn't seem too likely since Mandela's decided not to run. But I do think that Brown's got a ton of his candidacy is what makes this race really competitive. I know Tim Ryan was a good candidate and he lost by 6, but he is no Sherrod Brown. So I do think that this is a pure toss-up in my mind, but I do think that Brown narrowly goes down as of right now. The Republican nominee will probably be Secretary of State Frank LaRose. And so now for the final state, Arizona. I think that this, Cinema's party switch really makes this a really dicey situation for the Democrats. If they do decide to run, another candidate against Cinema, I do think that they do that. He or she, and Cinema will split the vote, which will result in a Republican victory. But if Democrats decide not to run, or if Cinema just decides not to run for some reason, even though I doubt that she won't, based on this party switch. It probably does move into the Democratic column. I think it also depends on how strong the GOP nominee here is. If it's Andy Biggs, I think that he would probably be the most. He would be the weakest candidate for the GOP. I think if Doug Ducey runs, that would really be a good look for them. Blake Masters, I really don't think is going to run again. Although again, the vote splitting could make it a lot more. Really does make it a lot more. Uh, I guess what's the word? Can't think attainable for the GOP. But again, maybe Democrats don't run a candidate, or maybe, for some reason, Cinema decides not to run. Either way, if there is a vote split, I do think that, if there is, more than two candidates on the ballot, that is going to hurt Democrats, and that's probably going to cost them the seat, because, as history has shown us, vote splitting between candidates with similar ideologies does not typically go well for that side of the political spectrum. Just ask Charlie Crist and Kendrick Meek from the 2010 Florida Senate race. But right now, I do think that it's more likely than not the Democrats run a candidate in Arizona. Unfortunately for Senate, unfortunately for their chances. But I do think that it is probably going to, I do think that if Democrats do unite around Cinema like they did around Evan McMullen in Utah this year, then this probably does move to a tilt Democratic state, or I guess tilt independent, even though, Vermont and Maine both have independents but are safe blue. So that is it for this video. This is my not final Senate prediction, far from it. My first Senate prediction. You've got overall with the Class 1 Senate seats, you got 19 Democrats, and 14 Republicans. But in the official Senate map, we will go over that. Basically, what this prediction would amount to with the Senate map is with the Senate map. Sorry, I'm talking really fast. Would be about 53 to 47 majority for the Democrats, since Sanders and King would be caucusing with them. Or sorry, Democrats would be at 47 seats, Republicans would be at 53, so they pick up 4 Senate seats in this prediction. If this prediction does hold true, which would give them the Senate. And I think that this is a pretty realistic scenario as of right now. Democrats could potentially hold the Senate in 2024, but again, that means that they're going to have to, win all but one of their seats, or potentially even pick up a seat, which I think is even more unlikely. So right now, I will go with the consensus and say that the GOP is the undeniable favor, undeniably favored to win the Senate, because that is, I think, where it stands right now. So thank you guys for watching this video. I apologize if it was too long. My recorder here doesn't put up the exact time, but I'll see it once I'm done recording. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss another video like this. Check out my 2022, my 2022 content and the videos following, which will be about 2024 and beyond, and of course some of the 2023 elections. But yeah, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to check out my non-political channel, Interactor127, and my comrades channel, Growlings 666, and I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.